Hey, it's Alan. Welcome back. Okay, in this lesson, we're going to talk about using those URLs that are in that text file as links in our final page. Now, as you may recall, the data originally came from a flat file, an Excel file. It doesn't really matter what kind of file, as long as it's, rows and columns like this. And each one, well, most have an author, and there's some other data like a image name for image file. The URL is what we're going to mostly focus on here. Each of those takes you someplace. I want to show these data to people. Now note that some of them don't have authors, and that's fine. That's on purpose, and we'll show how that works anyway. But anyway, what I want to do is I don't want to show it like a spreadsheet like that. That's kind of boring. I want to show them as cards. So the first thing I did is I converted that data to JSON format, and then I uploaded it into a Firebase database where it looks like this. So then each one of these corresponds to one row across the original file. If that were a SQL database, we'd say each one corresponds to one record in the SQL table. It's all the same, it's just different ways of organizing and describing things. But I don't want to show users just an ugly list. I want to make them look kind of cool. I'm going to make them into little cards like this, where each one has a picture and the name and the title. And we'll even make it so that it's responsive, so if they happen to look at it on a phone, it still looks fine and works fine, and it's just as easy to use. And of course, when they tap or click on a card, it takes them to the site that that card represents. All right, so far we've set up the website as a view website, and we've set up the Firebase database. We just looked at that. So now here's the website in Visual Studio Code. Most of what we're working with is under this source folder. I already added a couple lines of code to main.js to bring in the Firebase capabilities. Most of the changes we've done are here in app.view. So I'll just click that one to open it up in the editor and take a look at its code. In the previous lesson, we set up a loop that goes through each item in that Firebase database and shows the title in an H1 tag and the author in an H2 tag. That loop gets its data from a connection to Firebase, which involves this let config equal, and I've blurred some of that out because that's specifically a connection to my database. In your code, you'd have to make a connection to your database. But down here is where we say that items ref is a reference to that items node, which contains all of those links. Okay, and we export it here as a object, a collection called items. Up here in the template is where we loop through that items collection and display the title and author of each link. Right now, that's all the app does. So if I go back to the integrated terminal and do npm run dev to run the app. Remember, I have to browse to localhost to see the effects. I can't just open this in a browser because it's Node.js app. So when I go to localhost 8080, the page opens up, and I do see the H1 and H2 for each thing, but none of them are links because there's no link in the code yet. And in this lesson, we're going to go ahead and add the link to each one of these. Okay, so back in app.view in our editor, we look in here, we can see as we go through the loop, we use item.title and item.author. Can we just use item.page URL? Don't forget the double curly braces, the mustache braces. And if I put in item.page URL, okay, now if I look at that in the browser, I do indeed see the page URL, but it's not a link, it's just the URL. It doesn't really do us any good. If you know HTML, then you know we need a href equal type tags in here. So let's go back to our code and see if we can just put a href equal, and maybe that mustache thing in quotation marks, and close off the a tag after the h2. And then down below we see something that doesn't look good. Looks like it's not going to like that. If I went to the browser, I'd see it didn't work. Some gobbledygook down here tells me interpolation has been removed. Interpolation is that mustache syntax thing. It's telling me you have to use v-bind for this sort of thing, or the shortcut ID. All right, so now I Could run out to the view documentation and figure out what that means, but I happen to know already, so we'll just go ahead and make the correction now. Okay, back in the editor, still in app.view, we need a space v-bind : and that tells Vue to bind to this href attribute the page URL, except we don't use curly braces with v-bind. That's only for interpolation. So we need to replace those with a pair of quotation marks, just like this, okay? And so now we see both the H1 and H2 are inside that A tag, so they're both hot now. They'll both be clickable. Now remember, I have autosave turned on, so automatically it recompiles, and I see this time the compilation was successful, no error. So when I browse out to localhost 8080, I see the page, and indeed, each one of these H1s, H2s is a link, and when I click either one, it takes me to the appropriate site. All right, so that takes care of the linking part. Now, if you wanted to open in a new tab or window, go back to your A tag and use standard HTML, which is target equal, quote, underscore blank, close quote, and then in your page, which looks the same, but the only difference is that when you click a link now, it will open in a new tab rather than the same tab. And again, target equal blank is entirely optional. Whether you want to use it or not is entirely up to you. And that's just straight HTML. You don't have to do anything special for Vue. Now, one little caveat I should mention, though, is that there is a shortcut syntax for v-bind. And I mention it mainly because you might see it in other people's code or courses or whatever. You may just prefer to use it. And that's instead of using v-bind : you can just use : okay, and it has the exact same effect. But in the interest of making it a little more obvious than that, I'll go ahead and leave ours at v-bind, okay? Now, one other small detail you might notice is that down in the integrated terminal, there's a 1 next to problems, telling me that there's one problem in here somewhere. If I click problems, it tells me CSS do not use empty rule sets. And if I click that warning, it takes me right to the offending code. And as you can see at the bottom of app.view, I have a CSS style rule with nothing in it. Not exactly an earth-shattering problem. In fact, that's really no problem at all because the code works perfectly with it in there. It's just a warning telling you that, yeah, you've got a style rule in here that's not doing anything. For now, I'll just leave it in there because we will be using that style rule shortly. Now, recall that in our final product, we want to show each link as a picture. There's a card with a picture in it. You could think of it that way, too. And the file name of the picture for each one is in the Firebase database. Now, in this particular example, all the images are in the same folder, and they all have a .jpg extension, so I don't store that same information over and over and over again. I just store the unique part of each file name, and then we'll assemble the complete path later in the code. All right, so that'll be in lesson 7. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you over there in lesson 7. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.